This is where I live, a rewilding estate in the Scottish hills. I came here to rest, to recover from years of pushing too hard, trying to fit into a world that never quite made sense. And in the stillness, something shifted. I began to see a pattern I'd never noticed before, a different kind of wiring, a different way of being in the world. Some people call it giftedness, and it might be the missing piece in your story, too. Maybe like me, you've spent your life feeling like you're supposed to do something important, but it just doesn't quite happen. You try, you care, you start things, but somehow it never quite comes together the way you hoped. But then I came across this idea that giftedness isn't about being smart or successful. It's actually a different way of being wired. It helped me stop blaming myself for struggling so much. It helped me understand why I'd always felt separate, alone in a lot of ways. Instead, it helped me start building a career. This one, here on YouTube, and a life that finally fit. Because once I understood what was going on, I could finally start using my gifts in the way I've always needed to, for something bigger than me. So that's what this video is about. It's what I've learned about what giftedness actually is, not the stereotype, why a surprising aspect of giftedness is thinking that you aren't, how it overlaps with being highly sensitive but isn't the same, and how understanding this one part of yourself can shift the whole way you run your life. So the other day, I had a friend over and I told her I thought she might be gifted. She was like, "No, not me. Now, my boss is gifted. He's charismatic, gives incredible speeches. He's always buzzing with ideas." And I just sat there thinking, the only real difference between her and him is that he got to develop his gifts. She didn't. She had followed her husband's job overseas. She'd given up one career, then another to raise kids. She'd spent her life doing deep, thoughtful work, mostly without recognition. And I realized again, this is the story I hear all the time, especially from women, especially from people who feel like they've had challenges that others haven't. They don't see their giftedness, not because it's not there, but because it's gone unrecognized for so long by others and by themselves. They've all somehow never quite managed to be who they knew they could be. For me, I was in a gifted class in high school, but it felt pointless. We weren't challenged. We were just left to do odd little projects, like no one really knew what to do with us. And I didn't feel especially brilliant. I didn't win awards. I didn't get straight A's. Yeah, I was curious, creative, read all the time, but that just felt like me. No big deal. So when I didn't go on to do anything impressive, I sort of just let go of the idea that I might be gifted. I figured I just hadn't lived up to my potential, and maybe it was never that big to begin with. It took me decades to realize that wasn't true. What I lacked wasn't ability. It was the kind of environment that saw me, that reflected back what I was really capable of. So what actually is giftedness? It's a form of neurodivergence. Can you hear our guinea fowl? They're really noisy. So it's a form of neurodivergence. It's not about being better than anyone else. It's about being wired differently. A gifted brain literally takes in more information, more nuance, more patterns, and it processes it all more deeply. It makes faster connections, jumps across ideas, asks bigger questions, and often can't help trying to make meaning out of everything. Think of it like this. Most people's brains are set to single window browsing, one tab at a time, straightforward, manageable. But gifted people, they've got 20 tabs open across 5 monitors, all running search queries at once. And they've been like that since childhood. That can lead to brilliance, innovation, insight, but it can also lead to burnout, overwhelm, and mental health problems when you're surrounded by systems that don't work for you. And here's something else you may not realize, because I didn't. Giftedness isn't just intellectual. It can show up as emotional insight, being able to pick up new movements easily, like a dancer or a climber might, or a need to understand life's big questions. But whatever shape it takes, the heart of giftedness is the same. You process the world with more depth, more complexity, a drive to understand why, and a need to make things better. Let's talk about what giftedness looks like in action and see if any of these scenarios describe you. I'd love to know, so please comment below if you recognize yourself in one of these. So sometimes giftedness is intellectual, like obsessively researching something for hours, or seeing holes in an argument before it's even finished. Sometimes it's existential, questioning the meaning of life at 10 years old, feeling overwhelmed by injustice, or experiencing moments of profound joy or sorrow that seem to come from nowhere. Sometimes it's practical, knowing exactly how to fix something that's broken, or inventing new ways to do something that just seem obvious to you. Often it's about pattern recognition, seeing how everything connects, noticing what's not being said, or anticipating outcomes before others even realize there's a problem. It might look like having too many ideas, or getting bored quickly, or never quite feeling like you've found your place. And gifted people are often misread, seen as intense, aloof, disorganized, too idealistic, or difficult, when really they're just living at a different level of depth and complexity. The thing is, when this is your normal, you don't think it's anything special. You assume everyone's brains works the way yours does, which means you might be gifted and not know it because no one ever told you and you never thought to ask. Or if you're like me, you've dismissed it when people called you gifted because surely it would look more impressive than this. If you've heard of the term highly sensitive person, you might be wondering, is that a similar thing? And yeah, there's definitely some overlap. Both can feel things deeply, notice subtle shifts, get overwhelmed by noise or emotion. That's definitely a part of my experience. But they're not quite the same. A highly sensitive person might walk into a room and immediately notice the lighting's too harsh, or that there's tension between people. They'll pick up on the mood, the tone, the energy of the space, and really feel it. Some gifted people are like that too, but giftedness often goes a step further. It's not just feeling the tension, it's asking, why is this happening? What's going on underneath it? How could this whole dynamic be redesigned so everyone actually feels safe here? That drive to analyze, to rework, to understand things at a systems level, that's a big part of giftedness. And it doesn't always come with emotional sensitivity either. Some gifted people are more logical or strategic. They might be focused on innovation or creative problem solving, not picking up the emotional weather in the room. There's usually a pull toward meaning or clarity or change. Not just because you can see it, but because it's hard not to. That's definitely been true for me. I've always felt this drive to understand what's going on beneath the surface, to fix what's working, or at least make sense of it. Even when it's exhausting, that pull is always there. Here's the hardest part of giftedness for me, and really the main reason I wanted to talk about this today. It's the heartbreak I feel at all the wasted potential I see. Most of the world has no idea what to do with the kind of brain we've been talking about. I look at my husband and my son, and I see how they are so creative, perceptive, and full of ideas that could change things. And then I watch them get shut down, ignored, dismissed, even punished, let's just say we've had our share of sit-downs with the school over it. My husband once came up with a way to save the national network of hostels in Wales. Affordable, often donated buildings meant to give people low-cost access to the outdoors. So he proved it could work. He ran a pilot hostel that made money when others were losing it. But the organization didn't want his ideas. They said it was too different, too new. So they sold off the hostels instead. And once they were gone for good. All those places people had donated, hoping to help others connect to nature, lost. And with them went yet another way for people to access the outdoors, especially if they didn't have much money. And that's the story I see again and again. Gifted people offering real, tested solutions and being ignored because what they see feels too far outside the norm. When your way of seeing gets rejected long enough, you stop offering it. You pull back and you shrink. I did for decades. It's hard to be nearly 50 and look back at what feels like a life of wasted potential. All those ideas I never shared, those visions I never built. But I'm here now, and I'm determined to help other people not spend their whole lives fighting the wrong battle, thinking there's something wrong with them. Far too often I see gifted people who have been stuck or sidelined because their gifts have been unseen, then start to turn the blame inward. They think they're not trying hard enough. They think they're lazy or damaged or failures. But it's just that they've been solving the wrong problem. The problem isn't them, it's that they've never had a life that actually supports who they are. So if any part of you is starting to wonder, well, maybe I am gifted, the next step isn't to push harder. It's to ask, what do I actually need in order to feel well? And how can I start building that, even in tiny ways, with people who understand? If you want help figuring out what that might look like in real life, my last video goes into it more and you'll find it linked below. But wherever you are in all this, whether you're just starting to wonder or you're beginning to see it clearly, just remember, you don't need permission. You don't need a diagnosis. You don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to recognize what you already are. And then begin the life you were actually meant to live. See you soon.